Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Chris, aka the IT guys, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to avoid multiple login on the same account, and you're going to be using PHP, MySQL, and a bit of JavaScript, and I will try to demonstrate this and you will catch up very well, and you can implement this same approach that I'm going to use here in your future or the current project. All right, before we start or we do anything, I will have to demonstrate on what we are going to achieve. You can see that I am having two separate browsers and they have the same interface, and we are going to simulate or to pretend that we are going to try to log in using the same credentials on two devices. And for that case, the first device that will be currently logged in, as long as we will be logging with the second device, the first one will be logged out automatically as the user session ID will be expired. So I'm going to go ahead and input my email and password. Okay, and you can see that I was successfully logged in, and I can see the user ID is 1 and the user session ID is bit of hashed code. And I'm going to go ahead and log in on the second device, and I'm going to provide the same password and use the same credentials, and you can see that now this key is changed and I was successfully logged out from this browser as this user session ID was changed from the one that we were having on this to this new one, and this is vice versa. As long as I'm going to log in again, the session ID will be changed and this user will be logged out. So I'm going to go ahead and provide the password. Okay, and you can see that now the session ID was changed, and it will wait a bit of seconds and it will be successfully logged out. All right, that's what you're going to achieve. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I will be remaining with one browser. And for this case, I'm going to be having the starting code, and the starting code it will include this schema for the database. I created the database which is called HANmedia. I used the HANmedia as my database, my current database. I created the users table with ID as into auto incrementing. This is now the primary key with the names, the email, the password, the user session ID, and this attribute for the created art and the updated art. Okay, and before we continue, we will have to also observe this login, and I'm having this snippet. It's simple, and I'm going to navigate to this folder, and I'm going to say localhost, and I'm going to go to login. It is called the login. I call this login, and the file is called login.php. Okay, in this case, we can see that it is a simple interface like the one that we were demonstrating on, and it seems like this one from here. And I'm going to close this as it is now the end result, and we're going to start step by step so as to explain you what is exactly going on. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize, and we're going to start by establishing the connection to the database, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this db.php. This will be the file that will help us with the connection to the database, and I'm going to open the PHP tag and close it, and I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call this connection, and this will be equal to new PDO, as I'm going to use the PDO for a database, and I'm going to set the database type as MySQL, as I'm using the MySQL, and I'm going to specify the host as localhost as long as we are on local. And I'm going to call this localhost, and after this one I'm going to specify the DB name. DB name is called DB HANmedia. All right, and after that I'm going to specify the username, and if the username for the database is root, and on the password, as long as I'm not using the password, I'm going to leave this blank, and after this I can go ahead and close. And to test if the connection was successful, we can go ahead and say if connection, we can go ahead and echo connected. Okay, connected like this one, and we do this for the matter of testing if we are reaching the database. And I'm going to try to navigate to the file that is called db.php, and we are going to test if it is going to reach there. You can see that it was able to connect to the database. Okay, So I'm going to get rid of this code as long as we don't need them. We were able to establish the connection to the database, and what this means is that whenever we try to do something to the database, we need to include this file which is called the db.php. okay, so I'm going to go on the login, and when you take a closer look to the login, you can see that I was able to make a form, and it has the method of post, and I have this input type as email and the name as email. And for the password, the name is a password again. And for the button for submission, we will need to use the login as now the trigger or the name that will be used to submit. So I'm going to be as you are seeing the action, I didn't specify any file. I'm going to make it here on the top, which means that it will submit on the same file to make this very easy, or to simplify it. But you can use any other file, but I like to use this method when I want to make things easier or to be fast. So I'm going to first include the file that I specified, which is now the db, as we are going to need the database in this project, db.php, and I'm going to do like this one, and I'm going to set the message, which will be the custom message that will be shown to the form according to the result that we will be getting. For example, if we input the wrong password, the wrong email, or the invalid information. Okay, and I'm going to initialize this as an empty message, and you're going to start by testing now if the user is now submitted, if the form is submitted. And I'm going to say if is set to I'm going to use this $sign, and I'm going to input post, and I'm going to check for the login button. If it is now correct, we will be implementing what will be between these braces. So for this case, I'm going to make an empty array, and I'm going to call this as form data. So I'm going to say form data equal to an empty array. Okay, is equal to an empty array, and I'm going to do like this one. And before we continue, we'll have to check even if now our input fields are not empty, and we will start by an email. So I'm say if empty, and I'm going to check for the post email. Okay, and I'm going to, if you remember that I use the email as the name. If it's empty, and if empty email, we're going to go ahead and say, okay, if it's empty, we have to list something. So I'm going to say, okay, message, and I'm going to concatenate, and I'm going to say, okay, message concatenate. I'm going to concatenate with this custom message that will be shown, and I'm going to make it as a list, and I'm going to say email is required. Okay, and I'm going to close this list element, sorry, like this one, and this will be the message that will be shown as long as we input the empty email, or we submit without any mail. Okay, and after this, we can, as we were in the if block, we have to implement also the else block, and in this else block, we will also check, as long as the email is not empty, we are going to check if now the email is valid again, and we're going to use not equal to filter var. This is now the PHP method to test if the email is valid, and the thing that we will input in here is now the email from the post. Okay, and I'm going to input the email here. And after we do this here, I'm going to input, and I'm going to use the filter validate attribute. So I'm going to say filter validate email. Okay, I hope it's like this one. In this case, we try to get rid of bad characters or another thing that can hurt the database, and as long as it will be not meeting the criteria of this, it will return the error. Okay, if it doesn't meet with that criteria, we'll have also to concatenate the message with the custom message that we set. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it here to avoid rewriting the whole thing. So I'm going to say, okay, invalid email. Okay, we need to simplify things like this one. So after that, we can go ahead and implement the else block. If now if it passed this test, we can go ahead and implement the else and the else will be in here. So if it's ended here, so I'm going to input the else, and I'm going to initialize the form data, the data array, and in that array I'm going to create an attribute that is called email, and this email will be equal to the post email. And for this case, we will be sure that the email that we are getting is in the correct format or in the proper format. Okay, so after we do this, we will from this block from this block up to here, we were trying to validate the email. So I'm going to go ahead and also validate the password, and to do that you are going to use the same approach, and I'm going to say if empty, and I'm going to check for the value that you want to check if it's empty. So I'm going to say if empty post, and I'm going to say password. Okay, I'm going to provide message here, and I'm going to paste the same message, and I'm going to say password is required. Okay, password is required, right? And for this case, as we are having the if block, we are also going to implement the else block. So in the else block, what we are going to input here is that as long as we pass the above, it will pass up the above requirement. We are going also to initialize the form data, and we're going to input the password, and we're going to say that the form data is equal to the password from the post. Okay, post password, password. All right, just like this one. It's so simple. So let's say that all the tests are now passed. So to be sure that all the tests are passed, we check if the message is empty, because as long as the message will be empty, we will be out of all this. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, we're now trying to check if all these kinds of stuffs are generated. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, if now message is equal to empty, which means that we're getting no message, we are getting the same value that we initialize the upper. And I'm going to say, okay, if that is now empty, I'm going to initialize another variable, and I'm going to call this data, and it will be an array. And inside this array, we're going to input some of the parameters that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to set the email. I'm going to do like this one, email, and the email will be equal to the email now from the form data. Okay, so I'm going to say form data, and I'm going to call the email. Okay, just like that. And also remember to terminate it here like this one, which means that array starts here, we input these variables, and now it ends in here. So, and the next step that we're going to check is that we are going to check if now the email exists in the database. So to do that, we're going to make a variable, and we're going to call this query. Okay, and this query will contain the query that we're going to use as the name specified. So I'm going to say select all from users, as we're having the users table where email will be equal to, and I'm going to input this email, and I'm going to end it here. So I'm going to do like this one and do like this. So what this means that it is going to check from the database where we have the email, like the exact email that we specified. So for this case, I'm going to go ahead and try to make another variable that to make another variable that, and I'm going to call this statement. And this statement, what it will do, it will initialize the connection to the database, as we having the connection variable that we made where we are trying to make the database connection, and I'm going to use the prepare to make a prepared statement. And for this case, I'm going to pass in the query that we made earlier. And for this, and we're going to execute this statement, and I'm going to say execute, and the execute, and the parameter that will be in the execute will be the data. Okay, That's like this one. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to make another variable and I'm going to call these lows. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take this statement and I'm going to call the fetch or method. And if you are familiar with PDO, you know what this means. Okay, in this case, to will fetch or the data from the that query that we were specifying. Okay, so and in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to check if now the results that are from database are not empty. So to do that, I'm going to say, okay, if now statement, and I'm going to say if statement, and I'm going to point to the low count function. Okay, it's going to count the lows is greater than 0. It is going to implement something here. So as long as it is greater than 0, we're going to say, okay, we're going to make an iteration, or we're going to try to extract the values from the array that will be returned from the database. And I'm going to say for each, and I'm going to point to the lows, this variable that we're referring to here, and I'm going to say as low. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to say low pass, which is now the low password, and the be equal to low, and I'm going to point to the password. Okay, and after that I can say, okay, user ID again, user ID equal to low, and I'm going to refer to the ID as now the user ID is ID from my database. So, and I'm going to check if the current password is the password from this form data. Where is it? Password from form data will be equal to the password from the database. So to compare that, I'm going to say, okay, if low pass, this is the low pass, is equal to form data, and I'm going to pick the password, and if it matches, I'm going to go ahead and implement some stuffs in here. If the match, what we are going to do is to start the session. Okay, session start first. After starting the session, we can also degenerate the session ID. Session regenerate ID, just like that. Okay, this is now the function that will help us to regenerate this session ID. Okay, and I'm going to say the user session ID, I'm going to make a variable which is now the user session ID, which will be equal to session ID as it will be generated. Okay, session ID just like this one, and the session ID will be stored in this variable. Okay, so as long as we'll be getting the session ID, the new session ID, we will need to update to the database to make the feeds that are now changed to tell the what is happening in the current state, and in that case the database will be updated, and the session ID that was there will be no longer existing, but we'll be having the new session ID. So to do that, I'm going to also make another query, and I'm going to say, okay, this query, what it is going to do, it is going to update users, and it is going to set the, as long as we are going to update the user session ID, this is in the column that you're going to update, and you are going to say, okay, if it will be equal to, and I'm going to do like this one, and I'm going to put this and this, and just like this, or I'm going to leave it and I'm going to implement some stuff in here, and I'm going to say that it is going to be the user session ID that we generated, and after that you're going to specify where it is going to point where. Now we're going to refer to the ID where ID is equal to, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did earlier, and I'm going to do like this one as user ID, just like this. Okay, after we are here, we can go ahead and do like this one, and then we end now that query. So after we do that, we're going to also point to the connection again, and we're going to execute that query. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to say connection, and I'm going to point to the query, and I'm going to input our query in here. So after we do this, we are going to store the variable into the session. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, session, and to store the variable to the session, I'm going to say session user ID as equal to user ID, as we're having that variable as user ID, and we're going to set now the session user session ID as equal to as user session ID, as we're having there, equal to user session ID, just like that. All right, so after we do that, we're going to go ahead and redirect the user to somewhere. So I'm going to redirect him or her. I'm going to say header, and I'm going to put location as home.php. We create that file that will be the landing page after you log in. So else, and as we were trying we were in this block for if the password is correct, and else we are going to initialize the same message, and you say that password is incorrect. Okay. All right, so and as we were trying to check if the email is good, we're going to see where now the statement was starting for the email. It was here is password, not email. As long as we're trying to check if now the email is there, and as long as we'll be not having email, we will proceed like this one, and we'll input the else here, and I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to say wrong email, as long as, or we can say email not found. Okay, just like this one. Okay, so after we do that, we can go ahead and test if it works. So I'm going to go ahead and see, and you see where we'll be directed, as long as we didn't create the home page, but we can test. So for example, if I do like this one, you can see that it was working, but as long as I don't have this home file, it was returning that this is not found. But it means that our file is working as expected, and the code that we wrote are working with no bugs. I hope so. So I'm going to go ahead and create the home page. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to call this as home.php. And in this case, I'm going to use emmet, and here just like this one, and I'm going to go ahead and say home, and I'm going to input welcome. Okay, simple. And I'm going to grab some of the bootstrap class, and I'm going to take this CDN for bootstrap so as to be able to use the bootstrap class, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in the header. All right, so I'm going to be using the bootstrap classes. I can use first div, second div, and third div, and in this case I'm going to call this as container class equal to container. Okay, and I'm going to give it a class of low, and I'm going to give it a class of for example, let me say core md 8. Alright, that's like this one, and in here I can go ahead and input h1 and say welcome home. Okay, and after we do this, we can go ahead and input some of the breadcrumbs, and I'm going to input the logout button. I'm going to call this href to logout.php. We will create that file too, and I'm going to give the class as class equal to btn danger. Okay, and what will be contained here is logout. All right, easy. And to check the current session details, we can go ahead and use the var dump or the print arrow. We can use anything so that to be able to see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and input it here. So I'm going to say, for example, let me say I'm going to open PHP and close it, and I'm going to say print arrow, and I'm going to print this session. It will print this session data. So let's go ahead and test again. If you're going to reach there, admin, I'm going to input the password. You can see that it was able to log in with this and the logout button, but we're having a problem on line 21. And the problem is that we didn't start the session here. So I'm going to go ahead and input it here. I'm going to input the to start the session. Just session start. All right, I hope this will resolve that. And refresh. You can see that it was able to return the user ID as one and the user session ID, which is like this one. For example, if we try to log out and log in again, this session ID will be regenerated. So I'm going to go ahead again and try to implement the logout. So to implement the logout, I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to call this logout.php, and here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and do like this one, like we used to do. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say, okay, session ID, session ID, just like this one, and I'm going to be pointing to the session, and I'm going to put the user session ID that is in there, session ID. All right, just like this one, and I'm going to session start. Okay, session start, and I'm going to session destroy, just like this one. And after we destroy the session, you can specify the header. Oh damn, not like that, header, and I'm going to say location with bitcode to login.php. Okay, so let's check it out. So whenever I'm coming here and refresh and I try to log out, boom, it works. And if we try to log in again, wow, you can see that now the session ID was regenerated. So I'm going to get and log out again. Okay, after we are done with that, we are going to go to another fun part where we are going to implement some of the JavaScript so as to be able to check all this. But before we do that, we also have to implement the messages. I used to tell you that if we provide some fake information or false information, there will be the message that will be displayed. So to do that, I'm going to go back on the login page, and I'm going to try to implement those messages that will be coming from the validation. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, below this I can go ahead and say, okay, if I can open PHP and close it here, and between these tags I can go ahead and say, if now the message is not equal to empty, because we don't need to show the empty messages. As long as it's not empty, I'm going to be echoing something. So for this case, I'm going to echo the div that will be containing the attribute of danger, and the danger attribute in Bootstrap, you know what it means. So I'm going to go ahead and try to implement it here. I'm going to make a div, and in this div I'm going to say, I'm going to give it a class of alert, and I'm going to give it alert danger. Okay, just like this one, and I'm going to cut this div, and I'm going to remove this space, and I'm going to echo, and I'm going to do like this one, paste this div, and I'm going to change a bit of stuffs in here. And what we're going to change is that between this div, I can go ahead and initialize the message that I want to put. So I'm going to go ahead and say, Okay, so as long as the div will be here, I'm going to carry it open here, and I'm going to concatenate with the message. All right, so just like this one, and but the message will be displayed as we used as a list. It will be in an ordered list. That's like this one, and after the message we are going to close now this unordered list. Okay, so let's test and see if this will work or not. So let's try to refresh. You can see that it is working. When you try to submit the form, when you try to input the fake email, it will do like this one. It will also check here, and when you try to log in, password is required, so I'm going to input and provide some of the fake password. Password is incorrect. You can see that it is able to display those error messages. So I'm going to go ahead and input the correct password, and you can see that it was able to log in successful. Okay, so I was talking about the fun part of using the JavaScript to implement now the automatic logout. And the JavaScript is not the proper approach to use while you are going to destroy the sessions or something, but as long as I'm showing you the concept, you can find many techniques to implement your own stuffs, but JavaScript can get the job done. So on here, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what we are going to implement. So as long as I will be on this file, this home file, this is where I'm going to implement my JavaScript. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I will go here below the div. And before we cross the body, I'm going to go ahead and put in some of the JavaScript. So I'm going to use the script tag as usual, and I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call this check. I'm going to use check session ID, for example. And what I'm going to do is now I'm going to open these braces, and in here I'm going to say, okay, let session ID be equal to, and I'm going to open my PHP in here. God damn it, PHP, and I'm going to echo now the session, and I'm going to input the user session ID. Okay, after I'm done with this, I'm going to do like this, and I hope you're good. So I'm going now to use the fetch, and this fetch will fetch the file that we are going to specify, which is called the check login, and we will be creating that file later on, and that file will be the one that we will be fetching. So I'm going to go ahead and say fetch. Okay, and in this I'm going to input the check login file. Let me do like this one. We create that file, don't worry. And after we do that, I'm going to input this then. Okay, and after we do that, I'm going to do another callback function, and I'm going to input some of the response that will be returned, and I'm going to go ahead. After now that response, I'm going to go ahead in here and try to return. It will return now the response in JSON format. Okay, to return the response in JSON format. And after we do this, we can also go ahead and say here again, we can also implement another callback function, and I'm going to say function, and I'm going to grab some of the response data. And what we can do after here, we can go ahead and let's say I'm going to open and close, and in here I'm going to say if now the response we're going to check for the response data, if response data dot output is equal to logout. Okay, what it will do, it will implement now the window dot location dot href, and it will be equal to login dot php. Okay, in this case it will be logout, as we need to log out, and the logout contain the login. Okay, and after we do that, the next thing that we are going to implement is now to try to call this function. As we are done with this, we come down here after this function, and I'm going to set the interval that will be checked before we implement this. And I'm going to say, after setting the interval, I'm going to say okay, function, and I'm going to do like this one function. I'm going to check we're going to call that function, and after we do that, we do like this one, and we set the time interval that it will be executed on. I'm going to input 10,000. Okay, and for that case we will check after 10 seconds. All right, I hope we are done. So let me go ahead and check if we didn't make an error. So response data, good. Okay, we are ready to test. If we met with any error, we will come back and debug that. So before we continue, we have also to make that file that I was telling you, that is called the check login, and I'm going to go ahead and create that file, check login.php. all right, I'm going to go ahead and do like this one as always, and I'm going to go ahead and include the db file. Okay, after we include the db file, I'm going to session start. Okay, after we do this, I'm going to do the query equal to select user session ID from users where, and I'm going to check for the ID is equal to, and I'm going to do like this one. Okay, just like this, and I'm going to input the session user ID, as we're going to use the data from the session, just like this one, and the user ID. Okay. All right, and you do like this one, and then we terminate. Not as we do like this one, then we do terminate. Okay, so after we do this, we are going to go ahead and make also we are going to implement the result that will be equal to connection, of course, because we're going to interact with the database. I'm going to point to the query, and I'm going to input our query inside in here. Okay, so after we do this, we are going to use the for each, and I'm going to say for each result, and we're going to say for each result as low. I'm going to say if now the what we're going to check here, we're going to check if now the session user session ID user session ID will be exactly to the session ID from the low. Okay, low user session ID, user session ID. Okay, if now this would be the same, we will input, we will make this data variable, and we will say okay, output will be equal to log to output will be equal to log out. But for here, as we're going to go to the logout, I will check if not. Okay, and this logout will be a string, of course. Logout. Okay, just like that. Alright, okay, and if it's not, else, I'm going to implement that now. The data, that and the output. Output equal to login. Login. Okay, just like that. And after we implement this one, we are going to convert that into JSON data, and I'm going to echo JSON encode, and I'm going to input the data. Okay, so we are going to test, but maybe let me go and see. Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and test if this is going to work. So for this to work, I'm going to add a new browser. So as I'm having this one, I'm going to open the second one, and I'm going to choose another profile. For example, let me do like this, and I'm going to check if it is going to log out automatically. I'm going to copy this link and paste it here. I'm going to log in here at gmail.com and try to do the same here and wait to see if it is going to log out automatically or not. Okay, you see that's working. Wow, you can see that now it was able to do that. Okay, that was it for today. I hope you have seen on how to do this kind of stuff. Let me know in the comment if you met with any problem or you have any recommendation. I will leave the source code for download for my Patreon members, and make sure you check it out our Patreon page and support our channel from $1 a month to get all the source code that we'll be using in here. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like. If you came on this channel for the first time, make sure you subscribe and recommend this video to your colleagues or your co-workers if you think they need to see it. And from now on till next time, I love you guys, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace up.